Marin Pruitt found the man at her well on a Monday morning in September. He was lying face down in the dust beside the stone trough, one arm stretched toward the water he had not quite reached, his body folded at an angle that said he had fallen from the horse that stood 10 yards away with its reins trailing, lathered and trembling, and half dead from thirst itself. He was Comanche. She could see that from the doorway. The long black hair loose and tangled, the buckskin leggings, the beaded band on his left wrist. He was also bleeding. A dark stain spread across the back of his deerskin shirt, below the right shoulder blade. Marin set down the water bucket she had been carrying and walked to the well and knelt beside him and put her hand on his neck. His pulse was there, fast, thready, a bird's heartbeat, and his skin was burning. She rolled him onto his back as gently as she could and saw his face. He was young, maybe 30, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, and a mouth drawn tight with pain, even in unconsciousness. The wound on his back was a knife cut, long and deep, crusted with trail dust, and the first signs of infection. She looked at the horse. She looked at the man. She looked at the empty road that ran past her farm toward Garnet Springs, 3 miles south, where 37 people lived, and most of them would tell her to let a Comanche die in her yard. She dragged him inside. It took her 10 minutes. He was heavy, taller than she had expected, dense with muscle, and the dragging opened the wound again and left a trail of blood across the porch boards that she would have to scrub later. She got him onto the floor beside the stove and cut away his shirt with her kitchen shears and cleaned the wound with boiled water and whiskey from the bottle she kept for medicinal purposes, and packed it with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey root that her grandmother had taught her to make, and she bandaged it with strips of clean muslin and covered him with her only good blanket, and sat back on her heels and thought, now what? She was 32 years old. She had been alone on the farm since her husband William had died of a rattlesnake bite 3 years ago, and she had managed the way frontier widows manage, by doing everything herself, badly at first, and then competently, and then with the grim efficiency of someone who has no alternative. She grew corn and beans and squash. She kept chickens and a milk cow. She sold eggs and butter to the general store in Garnet Springs, and mended clothes for the ranch wives and got by. She was not prosperous. She was not comfortable. She was alive, and the farm was alive, and on most days that was enough. The Comanche bands had been moved to the reservation at Fort Sill 4 years earlier, and the territory between Garnet Springs and the Red River was quiet now, in the way that places are quiet after a wound, not healed, just numb. The ranchers and the townspeople talked about the Comanche the way people talk about a storm that is past, with relief, and with the uneasy knowledge that the storm had been human beings, with lives and families and languages, and ways of seeing the world that the territory had decided to erase. Marin had not grown up with these opinions. She had grown up in Ohio, where her grandmother, a woman of strong views and a stronger back, had taught her that God did not sort people by color or language, and anyone who claimed otherwise was either lying or lazy. Marin had carried her grandmother's views across the plains, the way she carried her grandmother's shotgun, as equipment for living. The man woke in the late afternoon. His eyes opened, dark, deep-set, alert even through the fever, and he looked at the ceiling, and then at the stove, and then at Marin, who was sitting in the chair beside him, with her mending in her lap, and her grandmother's shotgun leaning against the wall within reach, because she was compassionate, not stupid. He said something in Comanche. She did not understand it. English, she said. He focused on her. The fever was making his eyes glitter, but the intelligence behind them was clear. Where am I? His English was accented but fluent. My farm, 3 miles north of Garnet Springs. I found you at my well. He tried to sit up, and the wound stopped him, and he lay back with a sound that was not quite a groan. Too controlled for that. The sound of a man who has been trained not to show pain. Knife wound, Marin said. Deep but clean. I packed it with yarrow. You have a fever. Who are you? Marin Pruitt. Who are you? My people call me Runs Far. The soldiers at Fort Sill called me Thomas. Which do you prefer? He looked at her for a long moment, as if the question surprised him. Runs far. Runs far. You are welcome in my house. I am going to feed you broth and change your bandage, and you are going to lie still until the fever breaks. If you try to get up before I say you can, I will sit on you. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the way a cloud's shadow passes over a field. You are not afraid of me. I am afraid of rattlesnakes and bank managers. I am not afraid of a man with a fever and a hole in his back. The fever lasted 3 days. Marin fed him bone broth and willow bark tea, and changed the poultice twice a day, and slept in the chair because the cot was occupied, and she was not going to move a wounded man to the floor. She talked to him while she worked, because she had learned from 3 years of living alone that silence is a weight, and words are lighter. And she talked about the farm and the chickens, and the cow, and the price of eggs, and the way the corn was coming in this year. And Runsfar listened with his dark eyes following her around the room, and said very little, but what he said was precise. On the second day, he said, "You have a fence post down on the south side. I can see it from the window. I know. I have not had time to fix it. When I can stand, I will fix it. When you can stand, you will sit down again and eat more broth." On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. Marin came in from the chicken coop and found Runsfar sitting up on the cot with the blanket across his lap and his eyes clear and steady. The infection was draining properly. The wound was closing. He was going to be fine. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had said it, and the way he said it was different from the way most people say thank you. Heavier, more deliberate, as if the words carried an obligation he intended to honor. "You do not owe me anything," Marin said. "I owe you my life. Among my people, that is not nothing." He stayed. He did not ask to stay, and she did not ask him to go, and neither of them discussed the arrangement, because discussing it would have required naming it, and neither of them was ready for that. He fixed the fence post. He fixed the barn door that had been hanging crooked since spring. He split a month's worth of firewood in a single afternoon and stacked it with an architect's precision against the north wall of the house. He worked silently, steadily, with the focused economy of a man who has lived his whole life reading land and weather and distance, and who applies the same attention to a fence post that he applies to a deer trail. Marin watched him work the way she had watched him sleep, carefully, from a distance, with a growing awareness that this man in her house was not what Garnet Springs said he was. Garnet Springs said Comanches were savages. Runsfar split her wood and fixed her fence and watered her horse, and moved through her world with a dignity and a quietness that put every man she had ever known to shame. The town found out on a Wednesday. Lyle Garrick, who ran the general store, came out to buy eggs and saw Runsfar in the barn and went white and rode back to town. And by sundown, Marin had 3 visitors on her porch. Lyle Garrick, Deputy Shale, and Owen Tull, who owned the biggest ranch in the valley and considered himself the authority on everything. They stood on her porch in a line, and Owen Tull said, "Marin, you cannot keep a Comanche in your house. He is not in my house. He is in my barn, and he is a man, not a thing to be kept. He is dangerous. He is a tracker, with a knife wound, who was dying of fever at my well. I helped him the way I would help any human being, and I will thank you to get off my porch." Deputy Shale shifted his weight. "Marin, if he causes trouble, he has caused no trouble. He has fixed my fence and split my wood, and not raised his voice once. He has caused less trouble in a week than Owen Tull causes every Saturday night at the saloon." Owen Tull's face went red. Lyle Garrick looked at his boots. Deputy Shale put his hat on and said, "Just keep it quiet, Marin," and they left. Runsfar was standing in the barn doorway when she came back. He had heard everything. "I should go," he said. "I am bringing you trouble. You are bringing me firewood. The trouble was here before you." He looked at her. In the evening light, his face was unreadable, or would have been to someone who had not spent a week watching him. But Marin had spent a week watching him, and she could see the thing he was not saying, the same way she could see a fence post that needed replacing, or a chicken that was off its feed. He did not want to go. He did not want to stay and cause her harm. He was caught between two kinds of loyalty, and he did not know how to choose. "The men in that town do not know you," Marin said. "They see a word, Comanche, and they think they know what it means. They do not know what it means. They do not know that you fixed my fence without being asked, and that you stacked my wood straighter than any man in the county, and that you said thank you, as if it were a vow. They do not know any of that, because they did not bother to look." Runsfar was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You looked." "Yes, I looked." "Why?" "Because my grandmother taught me that a person is not a word. A person is what they do, and what you have done since you woke up on my kitchen floor is everything that matters." He held her gaze. The evening was turning gold around them, and the barn swallows were diving for insects above the yard, and the horse in the corral was pulling hay from the rack with the slow contentment of an animal that feels safe. And Runsfar said, "Your grandmother was wise. She would have liked you," Marin said. "She would have said, 'That one is worth keeping.'" He did not smile, but his eyes changed, warmed, deepened, held hers with an intensity that was not aggressive, but attentive, the way he attended to a track, or a broken branch, or the direction of the wind. Marin felt the attention on her face like sunlight, and did not look away. "Stay," she said. "Not because you owe me, because I am asking you to." He stayed. The weeks turned into months. September cooled into October, and October hardened into November. And Runsfar built her a new chicken coop and dug a drainage ditch behind the barn and taught her to read animal tracks in the mud. Deer, elk, coyote, the small precise prints of a fox. She taught him to make cornbread and to mend a shirt and to play checkers, which he was terrible at, and to read English from her grandmother's Bible, which he approached with the serious attention of a man who understands that language is power. They talked in the evenings by the stove. He told her about his people, not with anger, but with a quiet, measured sorrow that was harder to hear than anger would have been. He told her about the reservation, and the soldiers, and the children, taken to the school, where they cut their hair, and forbade them to speak their language. He told her about tracking, how to read a broken branch, a turned stone, the pattern of dew on grass, and Marin listened and asked questions that were neither prying nor pitying, and he answered them because she was the first person outside his people who had treated his knowledge as knowledge and not as a curiosity. In November he killed a deer on the ridge above the farm, a clean shot with the bow he had made from ash wood, using skills he had learned before he could walk, and he dressed it and hung it in the barn, and that night they ate venison steaks by the stove, and Marin said, "This is the best meat I have eaten in 3 years," and he said, "There will be more," and the promise in his voice was not about the deer. She taught him to play the fiddle. She was not good at it herself. William had been the musician, and the fiddle had hung on the wall since he died, but Runsfar picked it up with the same focused patience he brought to everything, and within a week he could play a simple reel, and the sound of the fiddle in the house at night was a sound Marin had not known she was missing until it came back. One evening he played a melody she did not recognize. Not a reel, not a hymn, something older and sadder and more beautiful, and she said, "What is that?" And he said, "A song my mother sang." And she said, "Teach me the words." And he did, and they sat by the stove, and she sang the Comanche words back to him in her Ohio accent, badly, and he corrected her gently, and she tried again, and by the end of the evening, she could sing the first verse, and his eyes were bright, and he said, "No one outside my people has ever asked to learn a song." And she said, "No one outside my people has ever fixed my fence." And they laughed, and the laughter was warm and easy, and it filled the small house the way heat fills a room, completely, and from the center out. One evening in December, with the first snow falling outside, and the stove ticking with heat, Runsfar said, "Marin, among my people, when a man owes his life to a woman, he offers her his protection for as long as she will have it." Marin set down her mending. "Is that what you are offering? Protection?" "It is what I am offering. It is not all I am offering." She looked at him across the small room and saw a man who had been wounded and healed and who had stayed not out of obligation, but out of something older and deeper, and she said, "What else are you offering?" "Myself, all of it, for as long as you will have it." She stood and crossed the room and took his hands, strong, scarred, steady hands that had fixed every broken thing on her farm, and said, "I will have it, all of it, for as long as you will give it." They were married in spring by the circuit preacher who came through Garnet Springs, with Marin's neighbor Clara as witness, the only person in town besides Marin who had looked at Runs Far and seen a man instead of a category. Owen Tull did not attend. Lyle Garrick did not attend. Deputy Shale attended, and shook Runs Far's hand and said, "She is a good woman." And Runs Far said, "I know," and that was enough. The farm prospered, the fence stayed mended, the wood stayed stacked, and in Garnet Springs, slowly, over the months and years that followed, the people who had told Marin Pruitt to let a Comanche die at her well began to understand what she had understood from the moment she knelt beside him in the dust, that a human being is a human being, and the only thing that matters is what you do when one of them needs you.